There is a debt cycle that dwarfs all others. A financial spiral that did not just ruin a generation of speculators, but consumed an entire civilization. We are talking about the Roman Empire. Today, we must confront the final terrifying chapter of any debt-addicted society: sovereign default. We are not discussing a temporary recession or a market correction. We are examining the slow, deliberate economic death of a 1,000-year empire, eaten from the inside by its own unpayable obligations. The core question is stark. What happens when the greatest power in the world can no longer afford to pay its army, and the silent tax is finally exhausted? The answer is not merely collapse. It is a profound lesson in how fiscal irresponsibility translates directly into geopolitical oblivion. To understand Rome's eventual default, we must first appreciate the scale of its fixed costs. Unlike a dynamic modern economy, Rome's budget was dominated by one massive non-negotiable expense: the legions. Maintaining a vast, professional army of several 100,000 soldiers across 3 continents was the single greatest drain on the imperial treasury. The army was not just a tool of expansion, it was the foundation of political legitimacy. Fail to pay the legions, and you invite rebellion, civil war, and invasion. Therefore, the cost of the military was the unmoving anchor of Roman finance. This immense, fixed expense created a relentless need for revenue that the traditional tax base reliant largely on agrarian output simply could not meet, especially after the empire stopped conquering new wealth-generating territories. The imperial system was structured for endless conquest, but when expansion ceased, the debt began to compound. The first response to this compounding pressure was the strategy we previously defined: the silent tax. Rome's currency, the denarius, was initially a sterling silver coin, roughly 95% pure. It represented a promise of value. But beginning in the 1st century under Nero, and accelerating through the crisis-ridden 3rd century, every successive emperor, facing war costs or civil strife, systematically reduced the silver content to stretch the existing supply of bullion. This wasn't merely a small tweak. It was an economic death spiral. By the time of the soldier emperors, the denarius was often less than 5% silver, a copper token barely coated in precious metal. This process flooded the economy with dramatically devalued currency. The effect was identical to modern quantitative easing. The state paid its debts, the legions' wages, with debased money, forcing hyperinflation that wiped out the wealth of the populace and destroyed economic trust. The problem wasn't that the emperors were stupid. They were financially desperate, trapped by fixed costs and the need for short-term survival. But debasement, the silent tax, eventually reaches its mathematical limit: worthlessness. By the late 3rd century, merchants refused to accept the copper denarius, demanding payment in actual silver, gold, or kind goods. The vast, complex Roman market economy, based on a single fungible currency, fractured into localized barter systems. Prices skyrocketed because the unit of account, the denarius, was no longer trusted. Emperor Diocletian, recognizing the chaos but fundamentally misunderstanding the cause, attempted to fix the problem through government fiat. In 301 AD, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, a vast, detailed list attempting to legally cap the prices of everything from grain to wages. The consequence was predictable and catastrophic. Goods vanished from the market. Hoarding became rampant, and the economic structure seized up completely. The attempt to solve inflation through price controls only accelerated the failure, demonstrating the danger of political arrogance when facing a purely monetary problem. This financial exhaustion led directly to the final fatal default. When the debasement was complete and the currency was rejected, the state could no longer collect taxes effectively or pay its soldiers reliably. The legions, the very foundation of the empire's defense, began to mutiny, abandon their posts, or demand payment in real, precious metal, which the state no longer possessed. Rome defaulted on its ultimate debt, its promise of security to its people. This financial failure forced the state to withdraw its troops from outlying, less profitable territories like Britain, and eventually to simply stop defending vast swaths of the frontier. The barbarians didn't defeat a rich empire. They walked through the gates of a bankrupt one that could no longer afford the basic cost of defense. The slow, centuries-long financial decline, driven by endless debt and currency debasement, culminated in military insolvency, leading directly to the final dissolution of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD. The economic lesson. Here is a chilling one for the modern world. Rome didn't fall because of barbarian hordes. It fell because its political structure was incompatible with its economic reality. It had an unpayable debt load, the cost of empire, and when it tried to settle that debt through the silent tax, it destroyed the currency, the market, and ultimately, the ability to project power. Today, major global economies, the US, Europe, Japan, are carrying sovereign debt loads far exceeding anything Rome ever faced. And they are using the exact same playbook: mass currency creation and suppressed interest rates. If you find this relentless, unflinching decoding of the historical laws of money and power essential to your understanding of economics, please take a moment to subscribe right now. By subscribing, you are joining a community dedicated to recognizing these historical patterns, arming yourself with the strategic foresight to navigate the consequences of the modern debt cycle and safeguarding your future. The Roman Empire's greatest cost was its military. And the greatest financial trick ever played by any state is to pass the cost of war, the ultimate drain, on a nation's wealth onto its citizens, often generations later. Next time, we will confront the moral and financial implications of conflict. Join us as we explore the terrifying symbiosis between war and debt in our next episode, The Debt of War. How every major conflict is funded by the next generation. You will not want to miss this crucial examination of conflict finance.